going to start it right now.
All right. So welcome to the Active Teaching Lab. This is our first sort of what I had envisioned that we were going to be doing with a, in the past we have had face-to-face Active Teaching Labs. I know that some of you in the list have been to these before, and this is going to be a little bit different. And frankly, I'm a little bit concerned because I've never done this quite like this. So I encourage you to please hang out with us and help us figure it out. I sink in lower on my seat, and we're going to make sense of it. So welcome to the improving the remote experience, remote student experience. Let's see. I guess Karen, let's have you go through your slides right now. Okay, Karen Skiba.
Well, it sounds like everybody knows how to use it, so it looked like 100% participation there. So I'm just going to quickly remind people about a couple of the features, but not spend a lot of time. Sounds like we're all experts now after doing this. I'm Karen Skiba. I work with the Division of Continuing Studies and help faculty learn how to teach online through Teach Online at UW. But since most of you are knowing what's going on here, I'll just point out that this little button here that, I'll just circle that here, that you see here, the purple one right there with the arrow is the key one to keep in mind when you don't know where you are. It just opens and closes. So I'll just point to it here. So if you get lost, just open and close that. And it looks like everyone's an expert at the chat. And you can see how many people are participating today. We have 32. And if you want to share items, you can do that if you're a presenter on the share thing. And the settings is where John was pointing out where you can add your photo. But it looks like most of you have done that already, so that's great. So we won't go into a lot of detail there. So we would like you to participate as much as possible. This is an interactive session, an active teaching lab, right, John? So we want you to participate via the chat, and we have a couple activities, and John has his activity sheet that I believe has been posted in the chat. So we do want you to participate as much as possible. And for those of you who don't know already, Google Chrome is the best way to come in using Blackboard Collaborate. I've had people try using different, like Firefox, that works too, but usually Google Chrome gives you all the different features. We just ask that you mute your audio. Feel free to share your video when you're speaking, though. We'd love to see you. And we'll also show you the whiteboard experience as well. And we won't be doing any polls today, but it does have that capability. So just a couple tips here is to make sure your microphone is off and be sure to participate, because that's what makes Active Teaching Lab active. So here's a couple of the other features. So if you do have a question, we will ask that you raise your hand, because we do have a lot of people online. So here's where the raise your hand button is. So if you do have a question or want to make a comment, please raise your hand, then we won't talk over each other. And this is where you would show your video, and this is where you would turn on your microphone and turn it off. We will do one activity where we'll use the annotation tool, so those are fun to use as well. We're going to ask you to type in some information a little bit later. So that's the quick overview, but it sounds like all of you are experts already, so I'm speaking to the choir here. Turn it over to you, John. John, and a good tip is to turn on your microphone.
I've already failed at this. Fantastic. That's a way to learn, right? So in our face-to-face labs, the way that we typically do this is we start off and we say, hey, we're talking about supporting the remote students. What about that topic do you want to talk about? And then we go around and we ask people where they're from and what questions they have and what they teach, and that helps us get context. That might be a little bit difficult to do in this space, so what we're going to do instead is we're going to start off with the top 5 sort of takeaways. So if you can only join us for a few minutes, hopefully we're going to go over those top 5 things, and then you can leave. Don't leave, just stay and learn, okay? And then we're going to go to the what are your needs and your questions and your concerns, and you'll see that I've been pasting into the chat a link to the activity sheet. Generally, we use that activity sheet both for the top 5 things that we want to sort of the takeaways and some how-to things. We've got easy things, so if you've never used or if you've never done remote teaching, okay, anyone here? Here are some things you can do if you've done it for a while and you're starting to feel comfortable in it. Here are some medium level challenges to do. If you're an expert at it, we ask you questions. We give you some advanced things to work on so that you don't feel like we're talking too far under you. At least we hope that's the case. So we're going to ask you to add into the activity sheet, what are the questions that you have on this topic? And then we're going to try to follow a path going from sort of the questions that are the biggest questions to questions that are more specialized. And some of the most specialized questions we might take offline or afterwards so that we're not talking about things that nobody but you, because you're an expert and have found this sort of really weird specific question that needs to be addressed. We won't take up that space with other people. So that's our follow-up there. Let's see. The other thing about that, as you add your thoughts and questions, concerns on the activity sheet, if you see one that's already there, add a plus at the very beginning of it, right after the number or right after the dot, I guess. And I guess, I don't know if we have numbers or dots. Let's see what we have here. And then, you know, if there's 2 pluses or 5 pluses, we'll focus on that one first, okay? Is it back to you, Karen? Yes.
Yes, it is. I remembered to turn on my microphone, and I'll say hello to everybody from my house here. I'm actually in Germantown, Wisconsin, near Milwaukee. So good to see all of you guys today virtually. So as John said, we're going to focus mostly on that activity sheet, but I'd like you to take a moment just to give you your quick snapshot of what you're thinking and what your concerns you have about the remote student experience. Now that we've had, I've lost track of how much time, a couple weeks doing this. What are some concerns that you might have about the remote student experience? And click on that T tool that's shown right here. And if you could type that in here, and we're just looking for a couple words, nothing long. So the activity sheet will be where you can share more information, but you could type in just a few concerns you have from the remote student experience so far. Inclusivity and engagement, feedback on learning, again, engagement, students not being engaged, chaos, uncertainty, a lot of people that are concerned about engagement, and that's what I've been reading also. I've been listening to all the other universities in addition to ours, and a lot of people are concerned about how we're going to keep our students engaged. So you came to the right place. We're going to talk about that. And unequal access to technology, that's another concern that we'll bring up today. Very good. Oh, stressed. Yeah, I can imagine. Students who drop off. So it sounds like we're getting kind of a theme here of concern about attendance and feedback and engagement. So that gives us a good sense on where we can focus today. So this chaos, how much is too much lecture? Good. So I think you came to the right place today. We're going to address all of those different concerns. So I'm going to turn this over to John now. Oh, actually, it's me. Sorry about that. We're going to just give you a couple takeaways for you to think about, and we have a lot more details on the worksheet for you to look at. But we wanted to look at what might be the top 5 things that to take away, and it's also on that worksheet. If you look at it, there's a little more detail than what's on this PowerPoint here, is how to communicate with your students frequently. This is really important, especially for those who mentioned the issue about engagement, because we do that naturally when we're face-to-face. So what are the different ways that we can communicate with them frequently? So we're going to provide some ideas on that and give you a chance to ask your questions. But how can you create that sense of presence that you might have online also here? So we're going to talk about that because that's really important to maintain that sense of presence and that communications. Another takeaway is to consider converting synchronous activities to asynchronous, because we've all heard about the different issues of people not being able to access, or the technology issues, especially with Blackboard Ultra being in heavy use. So what are some things that you can do to convert to asynchronous and have a plan for when technology isn't working? And we've had that happen a couple times, unfortunately. So the issues with low band issues, the internet, There's been a couple, Culture has been going down, and Blackboard Collaborate has had issues. So what are we going to do when those things don't work? So it's important to consider how we can convert some of these to asynchronous. Providing more than one option. We have a whole webinar from Tom Tobin that talks about this. It gives you more details. But what other things can you provide students in case they can't use the video or can't watch the video or can't hear the audio? Or what can you do to be more flexible and accessible with your students? It's called, as Tom Tobin would call it, the +1 options to encourage thinking about what barriers your students have and what they're facing and how you can reduce and eliminate them. So that's another top 5 takeaway. Another one is creating small chunks, because we have these issues with bandwidth and also the issue of engagement with students. How can you chunk your lectures into smaller bits? Now, we did a seminar on this, a webinar on this earlier, and we found out that 6 minutes in research is kind of the ideal point. So anywhere between 5 to 7 minutes, if you could chunk your learning and provide some active learning application opportunities, even as simple as something that I just did just a second ago with the annotation tool. How can you break up the learning in a way that it's not only easier for students to digest, but also to keep their engagement and also to consider the issues of bandwidth, so you don't have an hour lecture on Blackboard Ultra, which we know that is not a good thing to do. So how can you chunk it? And our final takeaway, but I'm sure we'll have many more after we talk with you, is to continue to ask your students. Ask them what's working, what's not working. Maybe have an anonymous graded survey. We're going to have some resources in here. Collect feedback, find out what their pain points are so you can help them, because we're all in this together. They have concerns, you have concerns. This is one way that you can keep in contact with your students and find out what their concerns are. And that will also lead us back to number 1 about communicating with your students frequently, because they'll know that you care and that you're connecting with them and that you're doing something with their concerns. So those are the top 5 takeaways, but I'm sure we'll have more. So I'm going to turn this over to John to explain the lab sheet. John?
See. All right, if you can hear me, we're going down the infinite mirror of invisibility here. And in order for me to open up the activity sheet, you'll notice that the activity sheet is editable to everybody. So I've just created a link here, and in some ways this is a way to try to get your participation as much as possible. You have editing options here. I'm going to hide that now and point you down to, you'll see that the 5 takeaways that Karen just talked about here are at the top. And then right below that, we have the what do you want to learn? So now that you have an overview of what are these 5 takeaways, what are we talking about, up here with these types of questions, what are your specific questions? And our hope today is to try to respond to those so that you leave today saying, I've found or I've gotten what I've came here to get. So grab a number. We've added a couple of other numbers there so you don't have to type over each other. You can add at number 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or 10, any of those numbers down there. Grab one that somebody else isn't already typing on and let out what you're thinking. What concerns do you have? And if you have some very broad concerns, that's okay. You can add your broad concerns. You can add your very specific questions. In some ways, this also helps us document what the big questions are that people are having. And that way we can, if we can't answer the question right now, we can get to it later on.
And John, would you demonstrate one of the accessibility functions and zoom in a little bit so it's not so small on people's screens?
Oh, that is a very brilliant idea. I'm going to open it up to fit. Thank you for asking that. Oh dear. There. You should be able to see that now, correct?
Awesome, and thank you.
Thank you for the prompt. All right. So we've got things on, is it possible to have non-graded discussions in chats? And yes, we can definitely do that. Or even chats that are graded for participation, but maybe not give just participation grades rather than where everybody gets 2 points for joining. because you're right. Encouraging them to join an online chat that they host sometimes doesn't take any takers. The students are playing this like a game in some ways. They have to figure out where to put their resources. So if you don't give them points for that, they might not say that it's worthwhile. And a question about the imaging, posting an image. We can do that too. I'm just quickly, briefly thinking about these. So moderators, if you are interested or can, if you can do what I'm doing here with number 1, I'm just adding, in bold answer, and then if you have an answer to it, you can type that in. Thank you, Lauren and Christopher. And I'm going to do the same thing with this next one. This is a great idea. I guess the answer should, let's keep them all in dark and boldface so we can put some in the middle of the questions. And here's the thing about active teaching labs. A lot of you who are participating know the answers as well, so jump right in. If somebody has something to say about it, they can. Let me move my tab here to a different tab. So there's a lot of questions here in the chat I'm looking at as well. So as people are continuing to type, is there somebody, one of the participants who'd like to unmute their microphone and ask a really burning question? And the rest of us can continue to type.
Hi, John. This is Erlise.
Erlise, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. So I have a question. It's a burning question on my end, but it might be quite basic for others. So I apologize if I'm taking time away from more important questions. So I have to do a guest lecture next week. And my plan, doing active teaching that I've learned from you and Karen and others, I wanted to show a 10-minute video clip that is relevant to the content that we will be focusing on and then facilitate discussion. It sounds like what I heard earlier is that given the technology, that may not be the way to go. Instead, I should just have the clip on Canvas so that students can view it prior to class and then we engage in a discussion.
Yeah, so this is sort of the big question that a lot of folks are having right now. How do we do the things that we want to do that we've been doing in face-to-face sessions in an online space, especially given the bandwidth issues and the accessibility options and lack of options that a lot of students have. Does anybody have any really good ideas on how to do this? Just you could raise your hand, or maybe you could just try it. Yeah, just try it. You could just try it. Ahmed, what are your thoughts?
Hi. Yes, thank you for these efforts that you are putting and helping. Actually, before my answering that question, I just wanted to let you know that I had a low stake exam yesterday, and I had participation of 110, like I'm out of 115 students. So I think it's good to everybody know that hopefully and happily most of the students are online and following these lectures. But then go back to the question, I have this experience that I have linked to the videos directly in the Canvas, and they work very well. They work very well.
So-
I tried this system that you are sharing the screen and trying to show the video through this shared screen, but the quality of the sound was not very good.
All right. So and let me emphasize that's excellent. A good idea to sort of do as much of the flipping, if you will, of the video as well. Instead of trying to show it through your screen, as you can see, the resolution even of the video of the activity sheet here is pretty low. Imagine if it were moving, if it had audio with it as well. It's going to be lower than if you just let them look at that video on their own release and then come back and have a discussion with them. Now,
Okay,
there are
great.
lots of other ways to have the discussions as well. Margine, go ahead and jump in.
Sorry, I'm fighting with Google Drive. I was just thinking about Erlise's idea of having the students watch, or the participants, it sounds like, watch the video ahead of time, and personally that's what I would do. That way,
Yeah.
and maybe have a couple of thinking questions, so or topics that you want them to take away, so that they're prepared when they come and have a discussion.
So you give them sort of a test or a scavenger hunt for the video, so that they pay attention to the video and look for specific things. Great.
Yeah,
Oh, lovely.
Things to pull out, or I always like to say, hey, while you're watching this, pay attention to these 3 points, or what have you.
Great. David?
Yeah, what I would say was this came up yesterday for like a film study context, and with Lisa's idea, the suggestion was exactly that, to have the material available for viewing outside of that Blackboard Collaborate Ultra session. But the additional layer was to take like a representative poster image or a thumbnail from the guest lecture in your case, and put that in a PDF or in a PowerPoint or a JPEG file or a PNG file, and share that as sort of the key frame of the lecture, because that has not only the most fidelity in terms of like image resolution, but also is very low bandwidth in terms of the student experience.
So what you could can I take that just a step further and say, David and Elise, have the students take a screenshot of the part of the video that they want to talk about, and then they could use that screenshot as sort of a, remember this point, instead of explaining, remember the point where they came into the room and they did have that screen point, remember this point of the video? Take a look at that, and I had a question about that, or what did you all think about when this happened? But that way they're actually in there collecting some of the material themselves, and that might be a good way to do that. Great question.
That is very helpful. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. I'm even more excited now.
All right. It's difficult, I will confess, it is difficult for me to follow all of the text that's happening in the questions. So unless one of the other moderators has done so and would like to jump in, and, oh, welcome, Jeremy. Can I just, is there another moderator that would like to respond to one of the questions?
Juan, you want to share your idea about the narrated presentation and how you do checks? You want to share your idea?
Hi, everybody. It's basically that I'm afraid that they are cruising through the material without without paying attention to it. And I have short narrator presentations, 10 minutes tops, and there is always a mastery check afterwards that just check on knowledge or thinking questions that ask them to elaborate on some points. And I'm using more and more the Cultura feature of just getting the narrated presentation and adding questions in the middle of it. The presentation will stop and they will have a question. And it can be a thinking question or a multiple choice question. And it's just, again, out of fear of how do I make them engage with the material when I'm not there to check. That's all.
Awesome. Thank you, Juan. And I'm going to follow up on that or propose a variation as well as an option. So one of the takeaways you'll recall was to keep things very short. And even 10 minutes now might be a little bit long with students not in the res halls anymore, not having super high-end, high fidelity bandwidth. One of the options that we've been thinking about is using the Canvas quizzes. And what you can do is you can put chunks of video in the quiz question themselves and then have, 2-minute chunk or the first idea and then a quick quiz comprehension check. Exactly what you're doing in the in-video quizzing in Kaltura, but not using Kaltura, and breaking that video into smaller chunks that will load faster, that will take less bandwidth over a longer period of time. So you load 2 minutes now, you go through that, you load the next 2 minutes instead of loading the 10 minutes for the streaming. So there's another way to do that. And then you can also, that will go automatically to the quizzing, to the gradebook in Canvas if it's in Canvas. So that's a good way to sort of take those longer lectures and those longer narrated things, break them into pieces, and make sure that your students are following along by stopping every 2 minutes or 3 minutes or 1 minute and asking them a quick question. Are you still following? Question would work. Good, thanks for sharing that. Any other ideas, moderators, that you want to pull out, or Dan Pell?
Hi, everybody. Thanks, John. I'd like to talk about something, and if Ahmad Sachi is still on, he could also add to this. One thing that we found was a good way to get the students engaging, as you say, with the material when you don't have a chance to look over their shoulder, and when they don't have these opportunities for, say, think, pair, share or something that they would do in the classroom, was to build a journal assignment that goes along with the whole course material. And so questions can be added to that related to every, to lectures or to video or any other piece of material where you would normally have them stop and talk to one another. And so a lot of the same kinds of questions, but rather than talking to someone else and, about it, they write a short reflective journal piece, maybe a few sentences, maybe a paragraph. And if you have a lot of those, if you have one for every student, you can go and kind of look at them in between classes and get a sense of what issues are coming up or how well they're engaging with the material, and kind of get an aggregate sense of how your class is thinking about these things. And using reflective writing, it's a good way to get them doing the same kind of thinking without having to put the constraints of doing it synchronously. And if Ahmad is here, he could talk a little bit about how he's done that.
Yeah, Ahmad, go ahead. You got your hand up. Do it. All right, we're not hearing you, Ahmad. But let me also say, Dan, to follow up on that, the idea of a journal is great because that it doesn't just ask them objective knowledge questions, it also sort of can have them personalize the material for their own purposes and make it their own in a way that a simple yes, no, or multiple choice question cannot. So that's a good way to deepen the learning as well. Go ahead, Ahmad.
Sorry, I just forgot to turn on my microphone. Yeah, I just add that to your that this I have had several experiences with these journals in several of my small classes, and they are amazing. And weekly basis, I ask them several questions, and they are supposed to write and send it back. And I used to go through them and give them some feedback individually, also to the class. And they work well, but it's just that a lot of work, and it's just good for small classes.
Right. Very good. Sandy, you have your hand up.
Yeah. How do you create the journal? Is it just simply them posting somewhere, or or what? I don't understand.
Karen Skiba, can you jump
Yeah.
in here?
I'll be happy to jump in. We do journals all the time through Teach Online, so everyone who's been through Teach Online is an expert at journals. We like to use templates, though, that we create with, like if you're going through the course, maybe talk about, have a certain question you want them to consider for each module, and we develop a template, and I'll be happy to share it, but it's about teaching online. And we have questions that we have them fill out, and we say, hey, after completing module 1 or module 2, please answer these key questions. And in our case, we keep that journal open because we want people to learn about ideas from each other, but you can also close that journal and only have it between you and the student. So I'll share that template at the end, but it helps them keep their key learning in mind. And sometimes I even ask if they have a big discussion, what is the number one thing you learn from that discussion? Because a lot of those discussions can go on and on sometimes and back and forth. So on the journal, I might say, what was the one thing that you learned from that discussion that you're going to apply? So journals are a fantastic way to further the learning, and I'll share our template. We do it in Google Docs, but you could also do it in other ways. I just like the Google Doc because it's easy for people to come in and comment, and it's very easy to share ideas. So I'd be happy to share a template. Does anyone else have journal templates that they've used that they'd be willing to share? If so, please do so at the end.
And
Thank you.
I've taken that Teach Online. It was at UW class and had to fill out the journal. And I will say that when I was first faced it, I was like, oh, not a journal. But about
Oh, John.
well, I'm telling you an evolution story. I learned, okay? It became a thing that I actually really liked to do. But the first time, as with all students, anytime that you introduce change, there's going to be some people who will push back and be like, I don't want to do this. This is extra work, or this is new, or I'm not familiar with this. And it's hard to push through that. The reason that I started to like Lauren, to answer your question in chat, is that it started to personalize things for me. It wasn't just a question of what do I don't know. They were good questions, and I'm excited that Karen's going to share some examples under there, because it's not just a question, it's a journal. It's a prompted journal. So the prompts really helped sort of focus my thoughts on that.
And I guess I will add, we've went through many iterations of that journal to find the right questions, because it's very easy. Just like it's difficult to write a good discussion question, it can be difficult to write good journal questions, because you don't want it to be a simple yes or no answer. You want it to be more reflective and how they can use it. Otherwise, it's just another thing to do, and it can be. So you might have been there in an earlier iteration. We've had iterations over and over again, but it's really important to ask reflective, critical thinking type questions.
Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I was just going to add that a journal is also a great way to set up a activity that is like maybe a discussion later in the week, because you're focusing that sort of internal reflective process. And I think the value to students is that this is going to help you be successful later, as well as just digesting the content that they're absorbing. The other thing I was going to add was that one of the templates that I have makes use of the little trick in Google of appending the URL with copy instead of edit. So it allows you to provision a document easily, but not get mired in some of the technical pitfalls of collaborative authoring.
Yeah, thank you. Karen, can you join in?
Karen Spader.
Sorry. Microphone, Karen?
Now can you hear me?
There you go.
Okay. I was just going to add that there are a few Canvas strategies for setting this up. Just want to point it out in case people aren't interested in using, integrating things with like using a Google Doc and all of that. In theory, you could set up one-person groups and then create a group discussion forum that would be for reflection. So that would be only accessible to the people within the group, but since they're one-person groups, it would just be individual students. I would argue that that would be perhaps the most easily navigated if you had a smaller course. And it isn't really intended to work that way, but it could work that way. The other strategy, it'd just be to set up multiple assignments, having them be due on whenever you want the reflections to be due. The easiest strategy there would to be having students just making a text entry, which is one of the options for what students submit when you set up an assignment. So there are some Canvas tools that you could use to collect these kinds of reflective moments. Just wanted to point that out.
And that's good because in the chat we've got Heidi asking a question about access to Google Docs in China, for example. So using Canvas, assuming that they can access Canvas, for those journals would be a way to do that. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Tom Tobin.
Nope, I was actually just going to bubble up Heidi's concern, so thanks.
All right, fantastic. All right. Are there other questions or ideas that people have come up with that any of the moderators would like to talk about, or any of the participants? What is it that we're missing here that we haven't answered, or you'd like more questions about your answer in bold?
John, would you mind scrolling to the part about online presence? There's a section in the middle of the document. I wanted to ask a couple people here online because a number of you have mentioned the concern about engagement. That was one of the top concerns that you brought up when we did our annotation area here. And we have some information on online presence, which is a term used in online, but I see that we have some experts here. If I might pick on you, Peter Van Can, what have you done, or others who would be willing to share, not to pick on you, Peter, but I know you do a great job of it, of how have you helped that issue of students losing interest and trying to keep them engaged? And this online presence just gives a couple ideas, but I'd love to hear from a couple of you who I know are experts at this that are online right now.
Karen, one tool I've used is the breakout groups. I'm basing my teaching on a team-based learning approach. And so the breakout groups provide you with an opportunity to kind of like get people talking with just a really small group of people. And so that preserves some of the social functions of the whole thing as well.
To clarify, Peter, are you talking about groups in Canvas, or are you talking about groups in Blackboard Collaborate Ultra?
Oh, the breakout function in Blackboard Collaborate Ultra. And so like the teams that I have are semester-long groups that stay, regardless of whether you use online or blended learning.
So I think that last point that you made, it might be a little bit different in a face-to-face environment versus an online environment, and I'd love to have the folks who do more online teaching address this, but in face-to-face environments, the students see each other and sort of are aware of each other, and I'm wondering if in a remote teaching environment, if it's more important to keep those groups sort of cohesive for a longer period of time, rather than in a face-to-face environment, we might say, okay, this week you're going to meet with somebody else, and next week you're going to meet with somebody else. Is it better to keep those groups, those small groups, the same, or to change them up? What are people's thoughts on that?
This is Elise. I can chime in on that. So in our DNP program in the School of Nursing, it's a blend program, so part online, part face-to-face. And so what we do is we put students in small groups, so we could have a class of about 30 students, and we may have 5 groups with just 4 students or so. And we keep them in the same group for the entire semester. And we've gotten feedback from students that they actually prefer that, because if you break it up sort of midway in the semester, they feel that it takes them several weeks to get comfortable working with the members in their group. And then as soon as they get comfortable, then you split them up and put them in another group. So what we've done in the School of Nursing that's worked really well is putting them in small groups, but then having them stay in those groups throughout the semester.
Great. And then
That's
Sandy,
a great tip. Let me just add something really quick, because one thing that can be very difficult, even if you have an extremely large class, is to feel connected to all those people. So having those small groups that you can stay with, like Erlise was mentioning, makes you feel like you're smart of a part or smaller cohort, but you can have other opportunities that they can collaborate with each other throughout the course. But I like Erlise's way of making sure that they maintain that. So sorry about that. Go ahead, Margine.
Just to speak to Erlise's point, I actually took a course this over the winterim in the DNP program regarding curriculum development for nursing, and I have to say that being in the small group made me have to rely on my group members more, and that also made me feel connected to the class, but also increased my engagement because we were working together, and their success kind of depended on me being engaged as well.
So there was some accountability with that as well.
That's the word. Thanks, John.
All right.
Can I add
Sandy,
one quick thing, Erlise, about accountability? Sometimes what I would do is have students take turns facilitating the discussion, so that also helped them accountable in terms of engagement throughout the semester.
I think that that's a wonderful idea, because oftentimes, if you don't do that, students might say, well, I'm the one who always has to do the work in this group. So if you can give the students roles within a group and have them rotate through the roles, they will learn from each other. They will all have a chance to shine or fail within the different roles, and they'll work over that as well. Tom, go ahead.
Thank you. And to add one more piece to this conversation, I see Peter in the chat saying small groups that are retained over the semester promote that neighborhood feel. They promote pro-social behavior. He's absolutely right. And I've been teaching fully online courses for 23 years. And the biggest mistake that I made early on, and I didn't correct it until like 3 years ago, was that when I would have students in online discussion forum areas like the Canvas discussion tool, I would say, post one message before Tuesday and then reply to 2 colleagues before Saturday. That's horrible practice, actually. That's just bean counting. That's just, oh, I gotta post something else and I don't know what to say. A much better approach is, if you're asking students to share their thoughts, give them a rubric or some measurement that is, this is what a message is that earns full credit and helps to bring the conversation forward. This is how you show what you know in my field. Post one of those, and then post at least one more message that responds in a supportive way to me or to one of your classmates. And don't be suckered into the idea of being the bean counter. Oh, you didn't post your 3 messages, so you don't get full credit. That's baloney. As long as students are engaged, and the criterion is post a message when you feel like you have a question or you feel like you can help somebody else, then it livens up, because they don't feel like they have to meet a minimum requirement. They feel like they're being asked to contribute to the conversation. So just a quick shift mentally for a lot of folks.
I'd like to jump in here and say that tomorrow we're going to have a lab, same time, same channel, on collaborations. So I just posted some information on the chat, but show up tomorrow and we're going to talk more about asynchronous collaborations, including activating online discussions and staging better student collaboration. So start thinking about questions on collaboration here. And Sandy, go ahead.
Thank
And
you.
remember, there you got your mic. Great.
I will be on tomorrow because I am moving totally asynchronous. I teach literature, and I teach, the literature requirement is for ethnic studies, and this is about race and ethnicity. We're reading novels, and yesterday I did in Canvas put the students into groups, which worked a little bit better. Well, both times when I started working in Canvas, it worked well. The first day in Blackboard did not work at all. mainly because of the technical issues I had that I just could not handle. I'm concerned now that I'm setting into a routine, and maybe tomorrow is going to be very helpful, that things will get boring. The group worked okay, quite fine yesterday, but I'm not grading everything every time some student opens his or her mouth. They have to participate. That's part of the requirement. But now the question I have is about social presence, because I realized in this discussion that I didn't quite understand what it mean, exactly what you mean online, because I thought that when we talk about communicating frequently with the students, I do that all the time. I open up my office hours. I tell them they can call me if they have any issues or concerns at my home number. I created a class Facebook page. Nobody's posted on it. None of that is encouraging engagement. What did work, as I said, is that when we were in these groups, I had to keep reminding them, this is a discussion, and I'm jumping from one. They figured it out. Oh, she's in each of these groups. She's going back and forth, and yeah. And then it finally began to happen. But now, can I sustain that? I'm not sure. I tried. Well, I don't think so. To get boring soon. I tried to get feedback yesterday. About this as opposed to collaboration. Because the students are taking other courses, so they know this stuff now. The few that responded said that they preferred asynchronous because they can access my weekly lectures. I post a weekly lecture on Saturday night. Somebody else said they don't have to spend the entire class period in their classroom. That's a problem for me. So anyway, these are just some of the things that I've been thinking about, but I want to hear more about the social presence, because you're not just talking about me being present to the students now, as I understood from somebody who just mentioned this just a minute ago.
So yeah, the thing about the social presence, I'm going to jump in, and then Karen or David or somebody else can jump in as well. But it's not just about you, right? It's not just about the instructor's presence. That's important. But it's also important that the students see that they're not in this by themselves, that they learn from each other, that they recognize that other people have the same struggles and questions that they do. So if we can provide safe, sort of very human spaces for them to be present to each other, that's also a thing that we want to talk about. David, do you have more on this point, or is it on a different point?
Yeah,
Karen?
it was kind of going to dovetail with that, because I had an opportunity to observe a couple courses in Blackboard Collaborate on Monday of last week. And one of the things that was fascinating was the acknowledgement of the global pandemic in the instruction, just based on, it's the first day back. But the idea for me, or the takeaway, is to really actually lean in to a reflective practice around whatever discipline specific thing is going to change or could speculatively change in a post-COVID-19 world, whether it's history or biology or politics, whatever it is, because students are already personally engaged in how this is going to impact them. And I can't imagine that there's a discipline that wouldn't have a hook into just talking about the relevancy of their experience moving forward.
I'm going to jump in there as well and point out what Juan has been mentioning in the side chat here, that the students they're not just taking your class online, they're taking all of these other classes online as well. And that's a lot of stress on them to be mindful about not overwhelming them with what you're trying to give them and asking them to be overly present in your course, because it's hard to be present at 24/7 or for your full amount of classes. But a side thing that I want to jump into this, and maybe this is taking it down a wrong path, and I apologize if so, ask your students what works, because they are taking more classes than you have. You're teaching 1 or 2, they're taking 3 or 4, or and they're in a lot of other courses. So they can see different ways of doing things, and they have different experiences than what you think might be best for them, or what you think might be their connection or their questions. to make the course material relevant to them right now. If you ask them, that forces them to sort of think about it and reflect on it, but also you can get ideas, and in some ways you're giving them agency to change your course accordingly. So go ahead. Tom Tobin, I saw your hand up there as well.
And it was just going to be plus oneing our friend Juan, so you're right there with me.
Awesome.
And I want to add something about, you were asking about presence. I guess all those ideas of making sure students stay connected are really important. I try to keep it in the course rather than going to outside places because they have so many things going on. So I create a place where they can ask Q&A in the course, where if they want to, not everyone will. Sometimes we get a high percentage and others don't. A place that if they want to share something personal, I call it the Internet Cafe, but you can call it whatever you want. Not everyone will take advantage of it, but some courses, they take great advantage of it and others don't. But I think the most important thing, is to make sure that you show yourself as human in the course. A simple email, and you can do that through SpeedGrader for people who aren't participating or didn't send something in. Hey, I'm concerned about you. I haven't seen you participate. Is there anything I can do to help you? That means the world to students. And you can send that with using SpeedGrader, and it looks like it's coming directly to them personally, individually, and it means a lot. It's been the most effective tool I've ever used in courses of people who've fallen behind, just so they know that you care about them, that you are thinking about them. To me, that is always the most powerful approach that I've found.
Yeah, thank you. Dan?
Thanks. I'd like to follow with what Karen's just been saying, because I think it's really really important that we constantly remind ourselves that the situation we're in is looking at like best practices for online teaching, but for students who did not choose to be students online, and in many cases wouldn't have because they knew that they didn't have the environment for it, the technology requirements for it, or that it's just not their approach to learning that they wanted to have. And so we're constantly needing to think, okay, we're doing something that is a good online teaching practice, and maybe it's working for a lot of people, but our attention needs to be really fully on the ones for whom it's not working, and trying to figure out what the alternatives are, and checking in with them directly and finding out from them why they're maybe not able to participate in something that is working well for a majority, but is definitely amplifying the barriers that exist for the students who are at the margins of our courses.
Really good point. Go ahead, Lauren.
So we're talking about students with the assumption that they're all trying to be part of our courses. What are people doing to make space for the students who are sick or caring for those who are sick, and they have to step away for a week or 2 weeks and then come back? So it's not that they don't want to be there or that their technology is keeping them from being there. What are we doing for those students?
Yeah, so this is another +1 for universal design for learning and low stakes options, right? So if they if they're out or they're sick or something happened and they have an asynchronous proctored test that's worth 30% of their grade, that'll ruin them. That'll ruin their semester. But if instead there are a series of 5-point quizzes or 2% of their grade quizzes that add up ultimately, that's something that you can be a little bit more flexible about, and that can really help out people as needed. Also letting them work ahead. Go ahead, Elise.
Oh, I was just going to add to that. Thanks for asking the question when you did, because I was just thinking, I was just sort of reflecting on that when a situation came up with one of my students in the past. I teach a course on psychiatric mental health, and we had gotten to a point talking about a certain type of disorder, and I, again, pay attention to the small group discussions and to see who's sort of participating, who may kind of drop off from time to time. And given the question that was just asked, for students who are dealing with caregiving and other sort of challenges at home, they may not necessarily come forward early on to say, this is what I'm dealing with. Sometimes as an instructor, if you pay attention and notice folks are falling off, then you may have to do the individual sort of reach out and presence. And so in the case that I started mentioning earlier, I had a student who just fell off. The student had been doing great the entire semester, sort of midway, 2 weeks went on, no communication, and I emailed the student, didn't hear anything, and then like by the third week, I sent another email out saying, I'm really concerned about you, and I noticed when we got to topic X, you fell off, and I'm just wondering if you may have been maybe personally impacted by that. And the student did follow up with me and said, yes, this is a health issue that I have been dealing with, and this is a very sensitive topic for me, and it triggered some negative reactions and challenges, and I'm trying to work through. So then I was able to work with the student, provide her with some resources so that she could get help and continue with the course, and I had to switch the assignment for her because the assignment was on that health condition, and she, because of her own life experience, she couldn't do it. So I was, again, very, very creative in working with my student in trying to support her. So recognizing that we may have to do some of that this time around with our students.
All right. And Karen Spader.
Yeah, thanks. I think that was a really great example to share. So thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I mean, I think that this is in this particular case, like, what do you do if a student is X? And X could be a range of things. I think that, we always have those possible situations, right? Regardless of our current pandemic situation, there's always the potential that a student will have, someone they love pass away or get sick and need those in the moment responses that are one by one, case by case basis. And I don't think this is really any different. I think that if you have a student who has that situation, you work with them to find an alternative for how they're going to either complete your course, or, unless I am mistaken, we still have the ability of giving students incompletes if that's a situation that is deemed necessary for students. So I think that, I guess my ultimate point is, for students who have extenuating circumstances, it's still extenuating circumstances regardless of our current pandemic situation or a normal run-of-the-mill semester. I guess I just felt like sharing that.
All right, thank you. Sandy. Go ahead, Sandy.
Yeah, this is a question for Duncan if he's still there. He said I publish recorded lectures. This is back to Canvas, I'm sorry, but I need to get these questions answered. And that is that I'm also recording lectures. And he says with now asynchronous audience response, which takes a considerable time, I'd like to know what kind of asynchronous audience response you're referring to, Duncan, if you're still there.
Go ahead, Duncan.
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I decided to record my lectures not through Collaborate, running the synchronous sessions, but externally. And I'm pushing those to YouTube and linking them to Canvas. One of the reasons is I was imagining I have students in New York, and who knows where they are in the world, and where it's incredibly inconvenient to arrive at the synchronous time. So I wanted that as a backup. And plus I find that some students, and sometimes myself, have difficulty with audio or video connections and so on and so forth. So I wanted that as an alternate. As I jumped into that, I was anticipating, wondering what I was going to do with the actual synchronous lecture times. I wanted to keep those because I feel like students want to stay connected to the course and be able to socialize and see the classmates that they miss and so on and so forth. But some students did chime in and say, look, these processing the recorded lectures takes a long time, and I've got other courses I need to work on. So what, in the second week, after just 2 days really, I decided I would make the synchronous lectures, lecture times available, but optional. So the not just reproduce the lecture for students who are there. Their audience response questions interlaced. I used Top Hat and made them all homework problems so they can be asynchronously pursued. And so I had to kind of reinvent what to do with the actual lecture times. I wanted them to be available. So I just ad hoc created, I have a breakout room or several ones that are devoted to problem solving using the electronic homework system that's working. Students can share an application where they get into an electronic homework system and they share and work on problems together. That when I drop in on a group that looks like it's working pretty well.
Duncan, what is the electronic homework system that you're talking about?
This is through Wiley.
Okay, so it's through a publisher space.
Right, fully integrated with Canvas. So I published the Canvas course. This is physics, introductory physics. We go through 20 or more chapters per semester at a high clip. And Wiley made available, I used their electronic homework system and I published practice problems, maybe 30 per chapter, which students, in addition to their homework, are encouraged to use. And these come with full solutions and hints and so on and so forth.
So a lot of, you have a lecture, you've got problems for the students to engage in, and they engage in them together, so they're not lost and working alone, but they're working in small groups to solve those problems as well.
Right, and they have productive time, and they can share the application. One of them can bring up the problem as displayed. They could all bring it up, but what they do is one of them shares the problem, and so they can scroll up and down and talk about solutions.
So this is synchronous as well. They have to meet together at the same time.
That's what we're doing with the synchronous time, but they can also do that asynchronously.
Okay.
We also have discussion meetings, which are a set of not homework problems, but problems that I've created that they work in small groups. And attendance there is pretty good. As soon as I made the lectures optional, and so in the discussion case, they work a group problem, they submit their created results electronically by images for assessment, and then they work it individually.
So these are things that they'll write on paper and then just take a picture of their answers. So that's a good way to upload it. Excellent.
Right. So the point I was making is those discussions are assessed, and now there's because so the recorded lectures are assessed through the now homework audience response, asynchronous audience response questions. So they can watch the video at any time as they go along, stop it. There's a audience response question. They can open up their Top Hat and answer that there. So that's assessed, but the actual now synchronous.
I'm going to jump in again here real quick. You're still using Top Hat asynchronously as well, not just as a classroom response system, but you're using their other features.
The problems that you've created for audience response in Top Hat, you click a button and they become homework problems. Okay. With a start date and a due date, so they can be done asynchronously. So the change is quite trivial. The point I was trying to make, though, is a lecture attendance, the synchronous lecture attendance dropped dramatically when I made it optional, which is not surprising.
Yeah.
But it's a good thing because it is a lot of time. That's another 3 hours a week to attend those, and they're putting in that time watching the recorded videos. Some students, though, do show up and work on some special challenges on epidemiology modeling and other physicsy things.
So anyway. Let me open up to the rest of the group. Are there other tips or techniques or tricks or practices that you all are doing asynchronously to get students to work together on problems? And you can raise your hand or you can just jump in. Go ahead, Ahmad.
Yeah.
We have so-called micro projects.
What's a micro project?
Well, these are a small project that we divide the class into groups of 3 or 4, and we give them the freedom to select some topics regarding to that section of the course. We have 3 micro projects during the semester. I think Daniel Paul, which is here, knows more about that and can explain it better than me. But these are just small projects. Well, for my large class, I have class which is usually more than 100.
Excellent. Dan, pal, you've been called out. Are you still here? He might not be. So, Ahmad, let me ask you a question about the groups. Do you assign roles within that, or do you let the students sort of figure out what they need to do on their own?
Well, actually, we give them template. We give them template. They share through Google Doc, and so they work together in like 20 minutes during the class time. And after like a week, then they submit one work per group.
Okay. Very good. Any other ideas that people have on how to get the students to work together asynchronously on projects or in discussions, things that are working? One of the things that we haven't really talked a lot about is the idea of bandwidth, or what technical issues that people are having. I'm trying to see if we've put some things on, I guess it's under the advanced, plan for unexpected interruption and alternatives. Are there thoughts that people are doing, or precautions that people are taking, or ideas from other moderators on tips that we can do to sort of plan for unexpected interruptions?
I think
Yeah, go ahead, Duncan.
Yeah, one of the things to think about is if you, is instructors becoming incapacitated. I'm sure we're all concerned about that.
Oh, right, yeah.
Planning to have a backup plan for all circumstances. All the TAs get sick or you get sick. So I'm struggling to make sure all materials are prepared in advance, at least baseline materials, and that's in place at sort of several stages. So I encourage people to do that kind of planning. What are you going to do if the TA is running your discussion sections is unavailable for any number of reasons? And what do you do if you are unavailable? In my department, trying to get organized along those lines, and we have sort of designated course coordinators, and every course has disseminates a document that describes the various plans for various contingencies. So I encourage people to really think about that.
How many, if you feel, instructors and folks, participants, that you are on your own, put it in chat somewhere, or let us know what thoughts that you have as far as what are you going to do if you get sick? Ideas? I hadn't even thought about that.
Well, someone needs to step in, right, for the instructor,
Right.
and we need instructions, and there needs to be someone who's
from bed.
somewhat familiar with Canvas and laying out a plan that says, what happens automatically, who's needed to do what materials aren't yet prepared, and keeping that up to date would be a suggestion. So I was saying, I don't know who will step in quite for me at this point, but there are a variety of sort of generic course coordinators in our department who are now added to as course coordinator roles in all courses. So at least they can log in your course, read the document, which describes what needs to get done, and then decisions to be made about like hiring graders or sliding a TA over from another course, and then who would do the administrating.
So, and this might be another area where the idea of the micro projects would be a really good one. Are there learning projects, are there independent learning projects that you can facilitate or have the students facilitate on their own? That online journal, any of the lectures or materials that you have up ahead of time that the students can access, and will the students be able to work on their own independently without you? Can you, as Lauren says in chat, can you get the asynchronous content up for the next 2 to 3 weeks so that they can still do something while you're out or while you're figuring out who can take over for you? This is also another really great point from Universal Design for Learning. The people in a regular class or regular classroom, what does that even mean anymore? I apologize for saying that. In a face-to-face classroom, sometimes people are dealing with things that, you know, are part of their lives, and oftentimes they figured out ways to cope by working ahead when they're able to, and then when they fall behind, they don't fall as far behind. As an instructor, it's important that we give them the opportunity to do that. So if you can, as Lauren says, put out materials ahead of time and let them work ahead, because they can plan for that. Sometimes they can prepare for the unexpected. They're already doing it because we all wake up with sort of bad days or bad weeks. All right, very good. So we have about 13 minutes left in this session before we're going to end up, and I want to go back to the activity sheet and ask folks again if anything has come up that we have not answered to their satisfaction, or if there are some questions that they'd like us to talk a little bit more about, or if there are any new questions that we've prompted or that have been prompted. Go ahead, Dan.
Hi, John.
And
hi, everybody. I'd just like to share an idea with what you were saying a minute ago. That one thing I think is really important to recognize is how socially isolated our students are right now, and they've lost their peer group, they've lost the people they work with normally for study or for jobs, they've lost the people they live with that know what they're going through and academically. And just anecdotally, I heard with instructors this week people saying that they opened up Blackboard Collaborate and created groups or started discussion, and a few people said they were disappointed that the students started immediately talking about what's going on in their lives rather than the course. Right. And I'd like to say that from my perspective, if the students are actually taking that time to talk about what's going on in their lives, it's really important. And the space that we create is also one part of where they can process all the things that are happening in their lives. And if the course creates chances for students to reflect and share with one another about that, even if it's not content related, that's also an important part of keeping them learning and keeping them sane through what they're going through. So
yeah, and let me build on that. I had a conversation with my neighbor the other day. The K-12 is going back to school, and she was talking about her 10-year-old, and the question is, well, of course, classes are going to be shorter because not as much time is going to be spent getting them to sit down, getting them to move into groups, getting them out of groups, getting them to, come in from the playground or line up for lunch or all of these things. And it occurred to me that going back to Peter Van Can's point in the chat several inches above now, it's easy for us to sort of pack up that information or pack up our course time with heavy duty content when in our face-to-face courses, a lot of time is spent sort of in between things where students can have these social connections, and social connections are a big part of especially the traditional college group. They might, as Dan says, be away from their peer group, but there also might be at home sharing a computer resources with their siblings, so they can't go online asynchronously every time that you want them to. So building in as much flexibility, but also letting them be human, letting them deal with the concerns that they have and connect with each other is really important. Sandy, please go ahead.
Yeah, my experience is actually quite different because I have a class of 22 students, and I have reached out to them, as I said earlier, via email and telephone, and asked them how they're doing. They're not sharing. I was really surprised and frankly disappointed that they didn't share anything on the Facebook page, especially since I have a photo of me in a wacky Rocky Horror costume. Nothing happened. Yeah, I told them just post anything. I thought it would work, that they would share with each other, but this is consistent with the class period. The students, when I would walk in the classroom, like many students today, were all on their phones, and the only time they engaged with each other is when I was standing in front of them. And so I pushed back on this. What I'm doing now is when we have, I mean, we've had two sessions, because the first one was a total disaster when I tried to do Blackboard Collaborate. But I'm sending out these like really things like a great job, folks. We had a great discussion. Keep it up. And even within the groups, and when I'm responding to them online, I'm being encouraging without asking them, and being yet one more voice to saturate them with all the stuff about COVID 19, because I think they need a break. I need a break too. And so far, nobody has come up in any of these forums and said anything to me about COVID-19. So I'm not introducing it. I do have a project about identity. This is a Cartesian notion. I exist, I am, I am, and all of that kind of stuff that we're going to talk about with regard to this book, Invisible Man, which might open up an opportunity. In fact, I'm thinking today how to frame a question that might open up an opportunity for them to engage and put themselves into the discussion about the novel. But otherwise, I realize that a lot of this is what I want and what I need. I have another class with 5 students, and we're doing that synchronously, and we see each other. That's really working well, but it did not work well. I don't think it works well with the 22 students. And I'm very cautious, as I said, about how much I put into it, because, we can't even turn on the TV anymore now. I play soft music in the house because it's driving me nuts. So that's my comment.
I'd like to second that. I feel
go ahead,
like
Duncan.
one has to be very careful here. It's quite a benefit to have a safe place that's going about some level of normalcy without all the noise from the news and stuff. So in my course Piazza Forum, for example, I told people, please talk about physics here, don't talk about all of the social stuff. And the news and so on, because some students really need it. It's scary, and to show up to a class and be distracted by news of illness, there's questions of privacy, there's lots of questions raised. To have a safe place, I think, is important. That's not to discourage students from sharing. One of the things that students could do is, I believe they can set up their own VD Collaborate video processes.
If they're in Canvas groups, I believe that they can do that. If they're not in Canvas groups, I don't think that they can. Can somebody confirm that in chat? And I really like the idea, Duncan, when you talked about Piazza, and maybe you could speak a little bit more about that. That has channels as well, right? I'll call them channels, where you might be able to have miscellaneous talk, miscellaneous chat, the way that
right, segregate that and have a special
segregate it so that they
folder,
can go into it if they want, but aren't forced to.
Yeah, I don't know that one is able to subscribe as a student folder by folder, because when you subscribe, you get email messages from, you get messaged from Piazza, and I want students to see those. So if you do something like that, probably make sure that understand whether students can unsubscribe to that thread, so they're not bombarded with information from students that's unwanted.
Yeah. And I guess Karen Skibba says that you can go to the UW, the my.wisc.edu page and set up a Blackboard Collaborate session without being in a course. And again, as Sandy had said, students are on their phone already when she's walking into the room. They are already connecting with each other via GroupMe, via all of the other different social media platforms that they might be on. Tom Tobin.
And I'd just like to add one more thing to the conversation that Sandy and Duncan are having with us now. Sandy, as a gentleman who used to play riffraff in the local Rocky Horror Picture Show thing in my hometown years ago, I feel ya. And if your students are not engaged on a Facebook page that you've put up, that may have to do with their public versus their private persona. If you're trying to use tools where, so for example, my Facebook page, I don't have anybody from work as my friends on there. That's for my family and people that I grew up with and those kinds of folks. And so be careful, everybody, that the tools you're asking your students to use are tools that, to Duncan's point, are just for study. So if you're working in Facebook, Twitter, those kinds of things, ask your students to either create an account just for education that's separate from their personal account, or use tools that are contained within and give some privacy to conversations. And Duncan's idea of having his Piazza forum that just focuses on his subject matter is a wonderful thing. And I don't think it's an either or. It's probably a both and. You can set up a water cooler channel or a Q&A or student lounge kind of place, and people who want to have those side conversations can go there and have them in the context of your course, especially because we moved from face-to-face instruction to remote instruction. You've got people who know one another from sitting in your classroom, and so giving them a social space where they can talk about things that don't have to do with your course or your field, that's a wonderful thing to do. Give them some privacy, make it an opt-in kind of a thing, and give them tools that they can use at a low level, just to say, who wants to study with me at 8 o'clock tomorrow night?
You can,
All
by
right,
the way,
great.
Piazza, students can, if you enable it, send private messages between them, each other.
And it's 11:28, so Sandy and Dan, you have the last words, but they have to be short words, okay?
Yeah, I just want to clarify that Facebook page is called Introduction to Masterpieces of African American Literature Facebook Cafe. It's closed. It's only open to them. But as somebody said here, the students hardly use that anyway, and I'm not going to Instagram or anything else. But I sent them a link to it and told them that they could post their pictures and things if they wanted to. I can also just close it if you think it's a safer thing to do.
Now, Sandy, this is Tom. Excellent clarification, and you're doing it right.
All right, and Dan, last word.
Just a quick one. I didn't make it clear. A lot of what people were talking about that wasn't course content related was more about their learning experience and how they were actually navigating being a student in this weird environment. It wasn't that people were using that as a platform to, fret and worry and share their feelings about COVID-19. It was more like what's going on generally being a student in this. And so that's when I say it felt like a really valuable conversation that they're having, is because that was a place where they could talk to other students who were experiencing similar things.
All right. And with that, it is 11:30 according to my clock, and we are out of time. I would like to thank you all very much for playing along with us. This was our first one. I was very nervous about how it would work, and I feel like it went okay. We're going to have more of these this week, Tuesday, Wednesday. Today's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and we're going to repeat these topics. This topic next Wednesday, tomorrow's topic next Thursday, and rotate them on. All of that information is on the instructionalcontinuity.wisc.edu under events. And if you liked this, thank you. Come back. Tell your friends to come on back as well. We're going to try to keep them going. Thanks, everybody.